Document. Part 1. Jack Miller was not the kind of person you'd expect to find at the center of anything exciting. He lived in a small town in rural Ohio, where life moved slowly and nothing much ever happened. His days were spent fixing cars, tinkering with old machinery, or lounging on his porch with a cup of coffee. Jack liked it that way. It was peaceful, predictable, and safe. But all of that changed one quiet morning when something extraordinary came crashing into his world. Literally. It started like any other day. The sun had just risen, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Jack had been up since dawn, working on his old pickup truck. It wasn't much to look at, but it was reliable, and he didn't have the money to replace it. So, there. He was lying on the ground under the vehicle, tightening bolts and muttering to himself about how stubborn the engine could be. A cool breeze rustled through the trees nearby, carrying with it the faint smell of pine. Everything seemed normal, but then something caught his eye. Or rather, something caught his ear first. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. At first, Jack thought it might be a plane flying overhead. Planes weren't uncommon here. They often passed over the open fields surrounding the town, but this sound was different. It wasn't the steady roar of an airplane engine. It was sharper, more mechanical, almost like the whine of an electric motor pushed to its limits. Curious, Jack slid out from underneath the truck and stood up, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. He scanned the horizon, squinting against the bright sunlight. That's when he saw it. Hovering above the treetops, about half a mile away, was a strange object. It shimmered in the light, its surface smooth and metallic, like polished silver. The thing was shaped like a disc, maybe 20 feet across, with no visible wings or propellers. Instead, it hovered silently, defying gravity as if it belonged to another world entirely. And maybe it did. For a moment, Jack just stared, frozen in place. Was this real? Could it be some sort of experimental aircraft? Maybe the government was testing new technology out here in the middle of nowhere. That would explain why it looked so alien. But deep down, Jack knew better. This wasn't human-made. Whatever it was, it didn't belong here. Before he could think too hard about it, the object suddenly moved. Not slowly, either. It darted forward with incredible speed, cutting through the air like a bullet. Jack's heart leaped into his throat. Without thinking, he dropped the rag and stumbled backward, tripping over the toolbox he'd left on the ground. He landed hard on his backside, but he barely noticed. All he could focus on was the object hurtling straight toward him. Time seemed to slow down. Jack watched, wide-eyed, as the disc closed the distance between them in seconds. It was going to hit him. There was no way he could outrun it. Panic surged through him, and he scrambled to his feet, throwing himself to the side, just as the object slammed into the dirt road behind him. The impact was deafening, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Dirt and rocks flew everywhere, pelting him like shrapnel. Jack shielded his face with his arms, coughing as dust filled the air. When the chaos finally settled, Jack lowered his arms and turned to look at what had once been a perfectly ordinary stretch of road. Now, there was a massive crater where the object had struck. Smoke rose from the wreckage, curling lazily into the sky. Slowly, cautiously, Jack approached the edge of the crater, his pulse still racing. His mind raced even faster. What was that thing? The object lay at the bottom of the crater, twisted and mangled beyond recognition. Up close, it looked less like a disc and more like a jumble of jagged metal shards. Parts of it still glowed faintly, emitting a pale blue light that pulsed weakly, like the fading heartbeat of some dying creature. Jack crouched down, peering closer. Despite the damage, he could see that the material was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It was sleek and cold to the touch, yet strangely warm in places, as though it were alive. As he reached out to touch it, a sharp buzzing noise erupted from the wreckage. Jack jerked his hand back instinctively, nearly falling over in the process. The buzzing grew louder, accompanied by a series of rapid clicks and whirs. Something inside the debris shifted, sparking faintly. Jack took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run, but curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. What if this thing wasn't dead? What if it was still dangerous? Before he could decide what to do next, a shadow fell over him. He glanced up and felt his blood run cold. Another object a second disc hovered above him, its surface gleaming in the sunlight. Unlike the first one, this one appeared intact, hovering steadily as it scanned the area with glowing red sensors. For a moment, it simply floated there, silent and menacing. Then, without warning, it shot forward, heading straight for Jack. This time, there was no hesitation. Jack bolted, running as fast as his legs would carry him. Behind him, the disc followed, matching his every move with terrifying precision. He zigzagged wildly, trying to throw it off course, but it stayed right on his tail. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his chest burned with exertion. He didn't know how long he could keep this up. The forest loomed ahead, offering the only possible refuge. If he could make it to the trees, maybe he could lose the thing. With one final burst of energy, Jack dove into the underbrush, rolling to his feet and sprinting deeper into the woods. Branches whipped at his face and clothes, tearing at his skin, but he barely noticed. All that mattered was putting distance between himself and the relentless pursuer. After what felt like an eternity, he collapsed behind a thick oak tree, clutching his knees and struggling to catch his breath. Silence surrounded him, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Had he lost it? Jack strained his ears, listening for any sign of the disc. At first, there was nothing, just the peaceful sounds of nature. But then, faintly, he heard it, the same low hum from before. His stomach sank. It hadn't given up. Whatever these things were, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. And Jack had no idea what that was. He sat there for a long time, weighing his options. Running again wouldn't solve anything. Sooner or later, the discs would catch him. But staying put wasn't exactly a winning strategy either. As much as he hated to admit it, he needed help. Someone smarter than him, someone who could figure out what these things were and how to deal with them. Unfortunately, the nearest person was miles away, and Jack didn't have a phone on him. Even if he did, who would believe him? Aliens, really? Just... As despair began to creep in, an idea struck him. The first Discord, whatever it had been, was still back there, smashed to pieces in the crater. If he could get back to it, maybe he could find some answers. Maybe there was something useful in the wreckage, something that could give him an edge against the remaining drones. It was risky, sure, but sitting here doing nothing wasn't going to save him. Taking a deep breath, Jack steeled himself and crept back toward the road. Every step felt like walking into a lion's den, but he forced himself to keep moving. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he paused, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The second disc was nowhere to be seen, though the hum still lingered faintly in the background. Heart pounding, Jack hurried to the crater and climbed down into the wreckage. What he found there would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire world. Document. Part 3. Jack and Sarah didn't waste any time. They knew the drones could return at any moment, and staying near the crash site wasn't an option. Jack grabbed the module and a few other salvageable pieces from the wreckage, stuffing them into a backpack he'd brought along. Sarah snapped a few more photos of the crater for documentation before they hurried back to her SUV. Neither of them spoke much as they drove away, the weight of what they'd just witnessed pressing down on them. The ride was tense. Every rustle of leaves or distant bird call made Jack glance nervously out the window, half expecting another drone to appear. Sarah kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gripping her phone, ready to dial emergency services if needed. But who would she call? The police? The military? How do you even begin to explain something like this? You really think those things are aliens? Sarah finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of disbelief beneath the surface. I don't know what else they could be, Jack replied, staring out the window. They're too advanced to be human-made, and that module, it showed me pictures. Alien worlds, armies, Earth burning. It's like they've been planning this for years. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had always been curious, always chasing stories that others dismissed as unimportant. But this was bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. If Jack was telling the truth, and everything pointed to him being honest, then they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. So, what's the plan? She asked after a moment. We can't just sit around waiting for them to come back. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. He hadn't thought that far ahead. All he'd been focused on was surviving. Now, with Sarah by his side, he realized they needed a strategy. I think we should figure out how these things work, he said finally. That modulate's got to have information we can use. Maybe it'll tell us why they're attacking or how to stop them. Sarah agreed, but we're not scientists. We need help. Someone who knows about technology, maybe even alien tech. Who's going to believe us? Jack countered. People will think we're crazy. Sarah hesitated, then smiled faintly. Leave that part to me. I'm a journalist. Getting people to listen is kind of my job. Jack couldn't help but chuckle despite the situation. All right then. What's step 1? Step 1 is somewhere safe to regroup, Sarah replied, glancing in the rearview mirror. Somewhere no one will find us. They ended up at Sarah's apartment, a small but cozy place on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much a cluttered living room filled with books and papers. A tiny kitchen, and a single bedroom, but it felt secure enough. Jack set the backpack on the coffee table, while Sarah pulled out her laptop and started researching. She typed keywords like UFO sightings and alien technology into search engines, hoping to find similar cases or experts who might offer insight. Meanwhile, Jack examined the module again. This time, he tried pressing the glowing patterns etched onto its surface. Nothing happened at first, but when he pressed 3 symbols in sequence, the device lit up once more. Images flickered in the air above it, faster and more chaotic than before. Jack squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There were maps, now star charts overlaid with coordinates. Some of them seemed familiar, marking locations on Earth, while others appeared completely foreign. What's it showing you? Sarah asked, leaning over his shoulder. Maps, Jack replied. I think they're planning something big. Look, he pointed to one of the coordinates, which highlighted a major city in Europe. Another marked a military base in the United States. It's like they're targeting specific places. Sarah frowned. If they're hitting cities and bases, this isn't just random attacks. They're organized. Before they could discuss it further, a loud knock echoed through the apartment. Both Jack and Sarah froze, exchanging worried glances. Who could it be? Had someone followed them? Stay here, Sarah whispered, grabbing a baseball bat from beside the door. She crept toward the entrance, peering through the peephole. To her relief, it was just her neighbor, Mrs. Harper, holding a casserole dish. Sorry to bother you, dear, Mrs. Harper said cheerfully when Sarah opened the door. I made extra lasagna and thought you might want some. That's very kind of you, Sarah replied, forcing a smile. Thank you. After closing the door, she let out a shaky breath. Close call, she muttered, setting the dish on the counter. To close, Jack agreed. We need to be careful. If anyone finds out what we're doing, they'll think we're nuts. Sarah finished for him, which means we keep this between ooze for now. As the day turned into night, Jack and Sarah worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of information. They discovered that the module emitted low-frequency signals, almost like it was communicating with something or someone. Using Sarah's laptop, They managed to intercept one of these signals, recording it for later analysis. Though neither of them understood the data fully, they hoped it would provide clues about the drone's origins. Around midnight, exhaustion began to take its toll. Jack slumped onto the couch, rubbing his eyes. "I never thought I'd say this, but I wish I'd stayed home today," he muttered. Sarah laughed softly, sitting beside him. "You and me both. But look at it this way at least. You're not bored anymore." Jack smirked. "Yeah, dodging alien drones has a way of spicing things up." Despite their attempts at humor, the reality of their situation loomed large. These weren't just machines. They were intelligent, adaptive, and dangerous, and they weren't done yet. The next morning, Sarah suggested reaching out to a contact she trusted, a retired engineer named Alan, who specialized in reverse engineering electronics. He lived a couple of towns over, and had helped her with technical details for past articles. Though reluctant to involve anyone else, Jack agreed it was worth a shot. They drove to Alan's house, a modest bungalow surrounded by wildflowers. When Sarah explained their predicament, Alan raised an eyebrow, but didn't dismiss them outright. Instead, he listened intently, examining the module and debris they'd brought along. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," Alan admitted, turning the module over in his hands. "But I can try to decode it. Might take some time though." Time was something they didn't have much of. Still, it was progress. As Alan got to work, Jack and Sarah returned to the apartment to prepare for the worst. They gathered supplies, flashlights, batteries, tools, and brainstormed ways to defend themselves if the drones attacked again. By evening, Alan called with news. "I found something interesting," he said over the phone. "The module contains algorithms, predictive ones. Looks like the drones analyze behavior patterns to anticipate movements." Jack's heart sank. "So, they're learning how to hunt me better." "Possibly," Alan confirmed. "But there's a flaw in the system. If your actions become unpredictable, the algorithms fail. That's probably why the second drone crashed itself earlier." Jack remembered his erratic movements during the initial attack. Could it be true? Had his instincts saved him not just once, but twice? "Can we use that against them?" Sarah asked eagerly. "It's possible," Alan replied. "If you can confuse their systems long enough, you might be able to disable them, but it won't be easy." Jack and Sarah exchanged determined looks. Easy or not, they had no choice. The drones were coming back, they could feel it. And when they did, they'd be ready. Or so they hoped. Document, Part 2. Jack crouched at the edge of the crater, his hands trembling as he sifted through the twisted remains of the first disk. The air smelled strange, like burnt metal mixed with something sharp and chemical. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't human-made. Every piece of the wreckage felt alien, cold to the touch, yet pulsing faintly with an energy he couldn't explain. It was as though the thing were alive or had been, before it crashed. He picked up a shard of the metal, turning it over in his hands. It was smooth, almost liquid-like, and seemed to shimmer when the sunlight hit it just right. Jack frowned. How could something so advanced end up here, in the middle of nowhere? And why had it attacked him? None of it made sense. But one thing was clear. If he didn't figure out what these things were, they might come after him again next time. He might not be so lucky. As he examined the debris, a soft buzzing noise caught his attention. His head snapped up, eyes darting around the clearing. For a moment, he thought the second disc had returned. But the sound wasn't coming from above it, was coming from the wreckage itself. The faint glow he'd noticed earlier had grown brighter, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. Jack dropped the shard and stumbled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. The light grew stronger, casting eerie shadows across the crater. Jack shielded his eyes, squinting against the brightness. Then, without warning, the glow faded, leaving behind only silence. Whatever power source the object had used, It seemed to have died completely. Relieved, but still uneasy, Jack forced himself to move closer again. If he wanted answers, he couldn't afford to let fear stop him. He began searching more carefully now, picking through the wreckage, piece by piece. Most of it was too damaged to make sense, of a jumble of wires, melted circuits, and fragments of that strange, glowing material. But then, buried beneath a pile of debris, he found something intact, a small rectangular module about the size of his palm. Unlike the rest of the wreckage, it looked clean and untouched, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly blue. Jack hesitated for a moment before reaching out to touch it. The instant his fingers brushed against the surface, the module lit up, projecting a series of images into the air. They flickered and shifted rapidly, too fast for him to fully understand. But he caught glimpses of alien landscapes, towering structures made of black stone, skies filled with swirling clouds of red and gold, and strange creatures moving in formations that reminded him of armies. There were also flashes of Earth, cities burning, people running in terror, explosions lighting up the night sky. Jack's stomach churned. Was this footage of an invasion? Were these aliens planning to attack humanity? Or worse, had they already started? The images disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Jack staring at the empty air, his mind racing. He clutched the module tightly, feeling its weight in his hand. This thing, whatever it was, held answers. Answers he needed to share with someone who could help. But who? He lived miles away from anyone, and the nearest town was too far to reach on foot. His truck was useless. He hadn't finished fixing it before all this madness began. And even if he managed to get there, who would believe him? Aliens? Invasion plans? People would think he was crazy or worse. They'd dismiss him outright. Just as despair began creeping in, the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached his ears. Jack froze, listening intently. A car. Out here. He climbed out of the crater, cautiously, peering through the trees toward the road. Sure enough, a dusty SUV pulled to a stop near his truck. A woman stepped out, her camera slung over one shoulder and a notebook tucked under her arm. She looked around curiously, her brow furrowed as she took in the scene: the crater, the scattered debris, and finally, Jack himself. "Hey," she called out, waving. "Are you okay?" Jack hesitated, unsure whether to trust her. But then, he noticed the press badge clipped to her jacket. A journalist. Maybe she'd listen. Maybe she'd even help. "I'm fine," he said, walking over to meet her. "But I don't know how much longer I will be." The woman introduced herself as Sarah Bennett, a reporter for the local newspaper. She explained that she'd received reports of an explosion in the area and decided to investigate. When she asked what had happened, Jack hesitated. How do you tell someone you've just survived an attack by an alien drone? But Sarah seemed genuinely concerned, her sharp eyes studying him carefully, as if trying to gauge whether he was telling the truth. Finally, Jack sighed. "You're not going to believe me," he said, holding up the module. "But this is proof. Something came out of the sky and attacked me. It crashed right here, and there's another one still out there." Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Something like a UFO." "Yeah," Jack replied, nodding. "Exactly like that." She studied him for a moment longer, then glanced at the crater. "Okay," she said slowly. "Let's say I believe you. What makes you think there's another one?" Jack pointed to the sky. "Because it chased me into the woods. It's probably still around here somewhere, watching." Sarah frowned, glancing nervously at the trees. "That's unsettling. But if you're telling the truth, we need to figure out what these things are, and fast." For the next hour, Jack and Sarah worked together to gather as much information as they could. Sarah snapped photos of the wreckage, while Jack explained everything he'd seen: the hum, the glowing sensors, the way the drones moved. She listened intently, jotting notes in her notebook. At first, She seemed hesitant to accept his story, but the evidence was hard to ignore. The module alone was enough to convince her that something extraordinary had happened. "This is incredible," Sarah murmured, examining the device. "If this really is alien technology, it could change everything we know about life beyond Earth." "It won't matter if those things come back," Jack said grimly. "They're hunting me for whatever reason, and I don't think they'll stop until I'm dead." Sarah frowned, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe not, but if we can figure out how they work, we might be able to fight back." "Do you have any idea what this module does?" Jack shook his head. "No clue. But it showed me pictures aliens, their ships, even Earth. Like they've been planning this for a long time." Sarah's eyes widened. "Planning what?" "An invasion," Jack said quietly. "I think they're testing us, seeing how we react." The gravity of his words hung in the air between them. Neither spoke for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "We need to take this seriously," she said firmly. "If what you're saying is true, we can't handle this alone. We need to get this information to someone who can analyze it, scientists, maybe even the military." Jack nodded reluctantly. As much as he hated the idea of involving outsiders, he knew she was right. He couldn't fight these things on his own, but trusting strangers wouldn't be easy, not when his life depended on it. As they packed up the module and a few other pieces of debris, the buzzing sound returned. Both Jack and Sarah froze, their heads snapping toward the sky. Through the trees, they saw it, the second disc, hovering silently above the clearing. Its red sensors scanned the area, locking onto them almost immediately. "Get down," Jack shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her behind a tree. The disc shot forward, narrowly missing them as it slammed into the ground where they'd been standing moments earlier. Dirt and rocks flew everywhere, forcing them to cover their faces. When the dust settled, Jack peeked out from behind the tree. The disc hovered nearby, its movements jerky and erratic, as if confused. It scanned the area again, then abruptly retreated, disappearing into the sky. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Jack admitted, "but I think it's learning, adapting." Sarah turned to him, her expression grim. "Then we don't have much time. If those things are getting smarter, we need to act fast." Jack nodded, clutching the module tightly. For the first time since the attack, he felt a glimmer of hope. With Sarah's help, maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance. Document. Part for the days that followed were a blur of preparation and uncertainty. Jack and Sarah spent hours poring over the information Alan had sent them, trying to make sense of the alien algorithms. They learned that the drones operated on a system designed to predict human behavior, anticipating movements, reactions, and even decisions. It was terrifyingly advanced, almost like the machines could think for themselves. But as Alan had pointed out, the system wasn't perfect. If someone acted unpredictably, breaking the patterns the drones expected, the algorithms would falter, causing errors in their targeting. This gave Jack an idea. "What if I use that against them?" he suggested one evening, pacing back and forth in Sarah's living room. "If I can keep moving in ways they don't expect, maybe I can confuse them enough to shut them down." Sarah frowned, tapping her pen against her notebook. "It's risky. What happens if you slip up? One wrong move, and they'll catch you." "I know," Jack admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But we don't have many options. These things are learning fast. Every time they attack, they get smarter. If we don't act soon, they might figure out how to fix their own mistakes." Sarah sighed, knowing he was right. She glanced at the module sitting on the coffee table, its faint blue glow casting shadows on the walls. "We need more than just you dodging around blindly," she said finally. "We need a plan, a real one, something that gives us an edge." Jack nodded. "Like what?" "Traps," Sarah replied firmly. "We set up decoys, distractions, anything to throw them off balance. And while they're focused on those, you do your think keep moving unpredictably until they crash themselves. It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Together, they began brainstorming ideas, sketching out rough plans on scraps of paper. They decided to use the forest near the original crash site as their battleground. The dense trees and uneven terrain would make it harder for the drones to navigate, giving Jack an advantage. With Sarah's help, they gathered materials from local hardware stores, rope, mirrors, old car parts, and started building makeshift traps. By the time they finished setting everything up, both of them were exhausted. The forest floor was littered with tripwires, reflective surfaces meant to confuse the drone's sensors, and piles of debris designed to look like hiding spots. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. As they stood back to survey their work, Sarah couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. This might actually work, she said, forcing a smile. Or it might not, Jack countered, though there was a hint of optimism in his voice. Either way, we'll know soon enough. As if on cue, a low hum filled the air. Both of them froze, their eyes darting toward the sky. Through the gaps in the trees, they saw the second drone, hovering silently above the canopy. Its red sensors scanned the area, searching for signs of movement. Jack's heart raced as he realized the moment of truth had arrived. "Get behind me," he whispered to Sarah, stepping forward cautiously. He knew the plan depended on him drawing the drone's attention, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. The machine locked onto him instantly, its hum growing louder as it descended into the clearing. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Jack took a deep breath, reminding himself of what was at stake. Then, without warning, he bolted to the side, zigzagging wildly between the trees. The drone followed, matching his erratic movements with surprising speed. Sparks flew as it collided with one of the mirrors, momentarily disoriented by the reflection. Jack seized the opportunity, ducking behind a pile of debris as the drone circled back, scanning the area. Sarah watched from a safe distance, her hands clenched into fists. She wanted to help, to do something, anything, but she knew this part of the plan was up to Jack. All she could do was stay out of the way and hope for the best. The drone hovered uncertainly, its sensors flickering as it struggled to process the chaos around it. Jack emerged from his hiding spot, waving his arms to draw its attention again. "Over here," he shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. The drone turned sharply, lunging toward him with alarming precision, but Jack was ready. He dropped to the ground, rolling to the side just as the drone slammed into another trap, a tangle of rope and metal scraps that tangled its propulsion system. The machine sputtered, spinning out of control before crashing into a tree. Smoke rose from the wreckage as the drone sparked and fizzled, its once glowing sensors dimming until they went dark entirely. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, cautiously, Jack approached the downed machine, his heart pounding in his chest. It worked, he breathed, staring at the smoking remains. It actually worked. Sarah rushed over, relief washing over her face. "You did it," she said, gripping his arm. "You really did it." But their celebration was before either of them could say another word. A second hum filled the air, lower, deeper, and far more menacing than before. They looked up to see not one, but 3 new drones descending from the sky. These ones were larger, sleeker, and clearly more advanced than the previous models. Their glowing red sensors locked onto Jack and Sarah simultaneously, leaving no doubt about their intentions. "We need to move," Jack said urgently, grabbing Sarah's hand. Now, they ran, weaving through the trees, as the drones pursued them relentlessly. The traps they'd set earlier did little to slow the machines down. These new models seemed immune to the distractions that had worked before. Jack cursed under his breath, realizing they were outmatched. Without a better plan, they wouldn't last much longer. As they reached the edge of the forest, Sarah spotted an abandoned barn in the distance. "In there," she shouted, pointing. "We can hide." Jack hesitated, glancing back at the drones. They were closing in fast, their humming growing louder with each passing second. He nodded, pulling Sarah toward the barn as quickly as he could. Once inside, they barricaded the doors and crouched behind a stack of old crates, listening as the drones circled overhead. "They're waiting," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They know we're in here." Jack clenched his fists, his mind racing. If they stayed put, the drones would eventually break through, but if they tried to run again, they'd be sitting ducks in the open field outside. Either way, they were trapped. Then, an idea struck him. "The module," he said suddenly, pulling it from his backpack. "If we can activate it, maybe it'll interfere with their systems, at least long enough for us to escape." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "Do it." With shaking hands, Jack pressed the glowing symbols on the module's surface. A burst of light erupted from the device, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that made their ears ring. Outside, the drones faltered, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. One of them crashed into the side of the barn, creating a gaping hole in the wall. Another spun wildly before plummeting to the ground, sparking violently. Seizing the opportunity, Jack and Sarah sprinted out of the barn, heading straight for the SUV parked nearby. The third drone recovered quickly, however, and gave chase, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. Just as they reached the vehicle, Jack turned and threw the module at the drone, hoping it would cause enough interference to disable it. The gamble paid off. The module struck the drone's surface, clinging to it like a magnet. A surge of energy rippled through the machine, causing it to shudder and collapse in midair. It hit the ground with a deafening crash, sending shockwaves through the earth. Beneath their feet, breathless and shaken, Jack and Sarah climbed into the SUV and sped away, leaving the wreckage behind. Neither of them spoke as they drove, their minds replaying the events of the past few minutes. They had survived for no— They both knew the fight was far from over. "What happens next?" Sarah finally asked, breaking the silence. Jack stared out the window, his expression grim. "We keep going. We find a way to stop them for good, and if we can't, then we keep running," Jack replied quietly. "Because giving up isn't an option." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of orange and purple, they drove on, determined to face whatever came next together. Document. Part 5. The SUV rattled along the narrow road, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white from tension. Sarah sat beside him, staring out the window at the endless fields passing by. Neither of them spoke much. They were too busy replaying the events of the day in their minds. The crash site, the traps, the drone sit, all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But the burns on Jack's arms and the scratches on Sarah's face were proof enough that it had been real. "We need backup," Sarah finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm but firm. "This isn't something we can handle alone anymore." Jack nodded, though he didn't look convinced. "Who do we trust?" "The military, scientists. They'll either lock us up or take the module and leave us in the dark." Sarah frowned, knowing he had a point. Governments weren't exactly known for transparency when it came to alien technology, or anything else, for that matter. Still, they couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, they'd run out of luck or gas. "We don't have a choice," she replied after a moment. "If those things are part of an invasion, then everyone needs to know. Humanity might be facing extinction here, Jack. We can't let pride or fear stop us from doing what's right." Jack sighed, glancing at her briefly before focusing back on the road. "Fine, but how do we even start? Who do we call?" Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts list. She stopped on a name, Captain Ryan Carter. He wasn't someone she'd worked with directly, but she'd interviewed him once for a story about emergency preparedness in rural areas. From what she remembered, he was level-headed and practical, the kind of person who might actually listen, instead of dismissing them outright. He's a local military officer, she explained, not high-ranking enough to bury us in red tape, but experienced enough to understand the stakes. If anyone will believe us, it's him. Jack hesitated, his grip tightening on the wheel. And if he doesn't, then we figure something else out, Sarah said firmly. But we're not going to get anywhere sitting in this car. Reluctantly, Jack agreed. Pulling over to the side of the road, Sarah dialed Captain Carter's number. It rang several times before a gruff voice answered. "This is Carter. Captain Carter. Hi. This is Sarah Bennett. I'm a journalist. You may remember me from that piece last year about disaster response." There was a pause on the other end. "Bennett? Yeah, I remember. What's this about?" "I know it sounds crazy, but there's been an incident. Something involving unidentified flying objects. We think they might be hostile, and we've got evidence. Can we meet you somewhere?" Another long pause. When Carter spoke again, his tone was skeptical, but curious. "You're saying aliens?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "We're not sure what they are yet. That's why we need your help." Carter sighed audibly. "All right. Meet me at the old factory on Route 12, 30 minutes. And bring whatever evidence you've got." When they arrived at the abandoned factory, Carter was already there, leaning against his truck with his arms crossed. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with short-cropped hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. His uniform was crisp, and his boots looked freshly polished. Clearly, this was someone who took his job seriously. "You must be Jack," Carter said, shaking hands with him after Sarah made introductions. Then he turned to Sarah. "So, what's this all about?" Jack opened the backpack and pulled out the module, setting it carefully on the hood of Carter's truck. The blue glow illuminated their faces as Carter examined it closely. "What is this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "It's alien tech," Jack replied bluntly. "Or at least we think it is. Those things, the drones, they attacked us. We managed to disable a few, but there are more out there, and they're learning." Carter stared at the module, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might laugh or walk away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a scanner of some kind. He ran it over the module, studying the readings intently. "This shouldn't exist," he muttered under his breath. "But it does." "Where did you find it?" "At the crash site," Sarah interjected. "One of the drones slammed into the ground near Jack's house. We salvaged this from the wreckage." "And you say these drones are targeting you specifically?" Carter asked, looking at Jack. Jack nodded. "Yeah, at first, I thought it was random, but now I'm pretty sure they're hunting me for reasons I don't understand." Carter rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I'll call in reinforcements and secure the area around the crash site. In the meantime, you two stay close. If these things are as dangerous as you claim, we can't risk letting them get away with more tech." Jack and Sarah exchanged relieved looks. Finally, someone believed them more, at least. Someone who was willing to act. "But there's one condition," Carter added, his tone hardening. "That module stays with me. My team has specialists who can analyze it faster than you can." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Jack. They both knew how valuable the module was. Without it, they'd lose their only advantage. But arguing with Carter wouldn't help. Reluctantly, Jack handed it over. "Just promise us you'll share what you find," Sarah said firmly. "This affects everyone, not just the military." Carter nodded. "Understood. Now, let's move. We've got work to do." Over the next few hours, Carter's squad arrived, transforming the quiet factory into a makeshift command center. Soldiers set up tents, erected floodlights, and established communication links with headquarters. Meanwhile, Scientists in hazmat suits began examining the module, running tests and taking measurements. Jack and Sarah watched from a distance, feeling both grateful and uneasy. On one hand, they were glad to have professional help. On the other, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were losing control of the situation. As dawn approached, Carter called them over. His expression was grim. "The initial analysis confirms your suspicions," he said without preamble. "This is extraterrestrial technology, advanced beyond anything we've seen before. The module contains detailed maps not just of Earth, but of other planets. It also has algorithms designed to study human behavior, predictive models, like you said. So, they're scouting us," Jack guessed. "Exactly," Carter confirmed. "Testing our defenses, learning our weaknesses, and based on the data, they're planning something big. Multiple targets worldwide." Sarah swallowed hard. "An invasion?" Carter didn't answer directly, but his silence was confirmation enough. "What happens now?" Jack asked quietly. "For now, we prepare," Carter replied. "My orders are to secure the area and neutralize any remaining threats. Once we've contained the situation here, we'll coordinate with higher-ups to develop a global response strategy. And us?" Sarah pressed. "What role do we play in all this?" Carter hesitated, then shrugged. "You've done more than anyone could ask. Stay safe and let us handle the rest." Jack wanted to argue to insist that they deserved to be part of the solution, but he knew better. Carter wasn't the type to bend rules, especially not for civilians. Besides, they'd already risked enough. As the soldiers packed up and prepared to move out, Sarah turned to Jack. "Well, that's that. Let's hope they know what they're doing." Jack nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "Yeah, let's hope." Unbeknownst to them, however, the drones weren't finished. High above the atmosphere, hidden among the stars, a larger ship monitored their every move. Its sensors tracked the humans' activity, analyzing their responses with cold efficiency. The battle wasn't over, it was only beginning. Document Part 6. The next few days passed in a haze of waiting and uncertainty. Jack and Sarah stayed at her apartment, unable to return to the crash site or venture far from town. Carter had instructed them to lay low while his team worked on analyzing the module and tracking down any remaining drones. It was frustrating for both of them. They felt useless, like bystanders watching events unfold without being able to contribute. But they also knew better than to argue with someone like Captain Ryan Carter. He was methodical, disciplined, and clearly in charge. Still, that didn't stop Jack from pacing restlessly around the apartment. "We should be doing something," he muttered one afternoon, glancing out the window for what felt like the 100th time. "Just sitting here feels wrong." Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she'd been typing notes about everything they'd seen so far. "Like what?" "Go back out there and get ourselves killed. We've done our part, Jack. Let the professionals handle it." "But what if they can't?" Jack shot back, turning to face her. "What if those things are smarter than anyone realizes? What if they're already planning their next move?" Sarah sighed, setting her laptop aside. She understood his frustration. It mirrored her own, but she also knew panicking wouldn't help. "We don't know anything yet," she said calmly. "Carter's people are good at what they do. If anyone can figure this out, it's them." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he flopped onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. Deep down, he knew Sarah was right. They weren't soldiers or scientists. They were just ordinary people caught up in something extraordinary. But that didn't make it easier to sit still while the world teetered on the edge of disaster. Meanwhile, several miles away, Carter and his team were hard at work. The abandoned factory had been transformed into a bustling hub of activity, with soldiers patrolling the perimeter and technicians huddled over computers and equipment. The module sat at the center of it all, its faint blue glow casting an eerie light across the room. Despite its small size, it held more information than anyone could have imagined: maps, algorithms, even fragments of alien communication signals. One of the lead scientists, Dr. Emily Lane, stood beside Carter as they reviewed the latest findings. "This is incredible," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "These predictive algorithms are unlike anything we've ever encountered. They analyze patterns in human behavior, not just physical movements, but decision-making processes too. It's unsettling." Carter crossed his arms, his expression grim. "Unsettling how?" "It means they're not just studying us," Emily explained. "They're learning how to manipulate us, to anticipate every possible reaction. If these drones are part of a larger invasion force, we're dealing with an enemy that knows us better than we know ourselves." Carter frowned, rubbing his temples. This was worse than he'd feared. "Can we disrupt the algorithms? Find a way to counteract them?" Emily hesitated, glancing back at the module. "Maybe. There's a flaw in the system. It struggles with unpredictability. Randomized actions confuse the algorithms, forcing the drones to recalibrate. That's probably why Jack survived earlier. His erratic movements broke the pattern. So, we exploit that weakness," Carter concluded. "Train our troops to act unpredictably during encounters. Use decoys, traps, anything to throw them off balance." "It's risky," Emily warned. "If the drones adapt faster than we expect, we'll lose the advantage." "We don't have a choice," Carter replied firmly. "We need to buy ourselves time until we can develop a proper defense strategy." As they spoke, one of the soldiers approached, holding a tablet. "Sir, we've detected movement near the original crash site. Multiple heat signatures. Looks like another wave of drones." Carter straightened, his jaw tightening. "How many? At least 5? Maybe more?" "All right," Carter said, turning to address the team. "Gear up. We're moving out." Back at Sarah's apartment, Jack and Sarah had no idea what was happening. The military hadn't contacted them since the initial meeting, leaving them in the dark about the ongoing investigation. That changed abruptly when a loud knock echoed through the apartment. Late that evening, Jack froze, exchanging a worried glance with Sarah. "Who is it?" he called out cautiously. "It's Captain Carter," came the reply. "Open up." Relieved but still wary, Sarah unlocked the door. Carter stepped inside, followed by 2 armed soldiers. His expression was tense, his usual calm demeanor replaced by urgency. "We've got trouble," he said without preamble. "Another wave of drones is heading your way. You need to come with us now." Jack's stomach sank. "Why us? Why are they targeting us again?" "They've tagged you as a threat," Carter explained. "You disrupted their systems once, so now they see you as unpredictably variable they can't control. Until we neutralize the threat, you're in danger." Sarah grabbed her bag, stuffing a few essentials inside. "Where are we going?" "To the factory," Carter replied. "It's fortified, and my team is prepared to defend it. Once we're there, we'll use you as bait to draw the drones out." "Bait," Jack repeated, his voice rising. "You want to use me as bait? It's the best chance we've got," Carter said firmly. "We can't risk letting these things roam free. If we don't stop them now, they'll keep coming backhand. Next time, they might bring reinforcements." Jack clenched his fists, torn between anger and fear. He wanted to argue, to demand a better plan, but deep down, he knew Carter was right. Running wouldn't solve anything. If they wanted to survive, they had to fight. "Fine," Jack said finally. "Let's do it." The drive to the factory was tense, the SUV speeding through empty roads under the cover of darkness. When they arrived, Carter led them to a secure bunker beneath the building. Inside, soldiers were preparing weapons and setting up surveillance equipment. The air buzzed with nervous energy as everyone braced for the inevitable attack. Carter turned to Jack and Sarah, his tone softer but still serious. "Listen carefully. Once the drones arrive, stay close to the team. Don't try to be a hero. Our goal is to disable them, not engage directly. Got it?" Both nodded, though neither looked particularly reassured. Within minutes, the hum of approaching drones filled the air. The ground vibrated slightly as the machines descended, their red sensors scanning the area. Carter gave the signal, and the trap was sprung. Soldiers fired flares and deployed decoys, creating chaos in the skies above. The drones faltered, momentarily confused by the sudden barrage of distractions. Jack seized the opportunity. Stepping forward and waving his arms wildly, "Over here," he shouted, his voice echoing through the night. The drones locked onto him instantly, their humming growing louder as they closed in. "Fall back," Carter ordered, gesturing for Jack to retreat. But Jack ignored him, continuing to zigzag erratically between the trees. Each unpredictable movement forced the drones to recalibrate, slowing their advance. One of the drones crashed into a tree, its systems overwhelmed by the constant changes in direction. Another collided with a flare, sparking violently before plummeting to the ground. The remaining drones circled overhead, their sensors flickering as they struggled to process the chaos. But then, something unexpected happened. A sixth drone appeared larger and sleeker than the others, with glowing green sensors instead of red. It hovered silently, observing the scene below. For a moment, it seemed indecisive. Then, without warning, it launched a concentrated beam of energy toward Jack. "Get down," Carter yelled, tackling Jack to the ground just as the beam narrowly missed them. The impact sent shockwaves through the earth, knocking several soldiers off their feet. "This isn't working," Sarah shouted, clutching her arm where debris had grazed her skin. "We need another plan." Carter nodded, his mind racing. He glanced at the bunker entrance, then at the module, which had been brought along for analysis. An idea formed in his head, one last desperate gamble. "Bring the module out here," he ordered. "We'll use it to overload their systems." The scientists hesitated, unsure if the plan would work. But with no other options left, they complied, placing the device in the center of the clearing. Carter activated it remotely, triggering a surge of energy that pulsed outward in a blinding flash of light. The drones shuddered, their movements becoming erratic as the interference disrupted their programming. One by one, they crashed to the ground, sparks flying as their systems failed. Even the larger drone faltered, its green sensors dimming before it collapsed in a heap of twisted metal. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, cautiously, Carter stood, surveying the wreckage. "It's over," he said quietly. "For now." Jack and Sarah exchanged relieved looks, though exhaustion weighed heavily on their faces. They had survived for now. But as they stared at the smoking remains of the drones, they couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, the real invasion waited, and humanity wasn't ready.